Good evening, Goodman Games fans, and happy Tuesday. My name is Matt Robertson, otherwise known as Grape Ape.
I'm Stefan Strad, otherwise known as DM Bad Wrong Fun on some of those Twitter thingies and everything else out there. And we have a wonderful special guest tonight.
I'm Daniel J. Bishop, better known as Raven Crow King, and that's me.
An outstanding special guest, very knowledgeable about the rules, creator, author, content creator. And Daniel, you're working on some stuff right now, right? You're converting the Fiend Folio or remastering
You could say that, I guess. Yeah, it's just a blog project. There's no remuneration involved. It is simply for love of the community, and frankly, I had to convert those monsters anyway to use them myself.
There you go. So we will have a link in the chat for you guys to his Patreon, to his blog posting, and to his DCC treasure troves page.
The Raven Crow King's Nest is where you will find the Fiend Folio listings. If you look at the upper right-hand side, there is a magnetic post called Finding Monsters in the blog, and you can use that to find whatever you're looking for.
I can't tell you how many times I've used that site for like the patron finder and the deity, the list of the gods.
Yeah, a lot of that is out of date. I'm only one man.
Yeah, I think my module is missing from there too, Daniel. We're gonna have to look that up.
Yes, things are a little bit behind, but it does tell you the last date of the update. So you know if you're looking for something more recent, it's just not going to be there.
There you go. All right. Well, as you guys know, we are going to ask Daniel our questions from last week when we had our special guest on, Brendan LaSalle. The first question was, Daniel, when you're using the dice chain and attacking on a dice higher than a D20, what are the rolls that would be critical hit?
Okay, if you're using a D24, I believe by raw, the critical hit is on a 20 or a 24. If you're using a D30, I would say, I think raw says the base one, the D20, and then a 30, but I would also say 24 would be reasonable. But let's say you're a warrior and you're rolling on a 19 to 20, then it's reasonable to say on a 19 to 20 or a 23 to 24, or on a D30, 29 to 30. If you're a giant, by raw, your crit is from a 20 to 24.
And so if you've got somebody who's used the enlarge spell and made their PC a giant, would you give them that crit range?
That's specific to the giant if you read the entries in the Cyclopedia of Creatures.
I tried to trip up Brendan with that one as well. We asked in the poll channel on Dungeon Crawlers, and we have a link for that too. If you guys are interested in the rules as written, submitting. Got a little bit of static going.
Sorry?
There it goes.
It seems to appear when you don't talk for a certain period of time, so you're just going to have to be extra talkative. I'm only halfway joking about that.
The one thing I will say about the rules is written for those crits, and just about for everything else, is on page 312, the most important rule is printed in white on black, which is let the rules bend to you, not the other way around. So if you really think that they should have that crit range, it won't hurt anything.
Absolutely. And in the poll, most of the viewers agreed that it was 20 and the new highest value. And for the Warriors, the 19 and 20 and the 24 or the 30, if rolling on those respective dice. So the viewers also agreed with that. What was our next question from last week?
You have wise viewers.
They are pretty smart. You got the next question, Steph?
I do. Our other one was, how is infravision defined and what can and can't you see with it?
Infravision is the ability to see heat. So you can see things that are warm, you can see things that are cold. You cannot necessarily make out details. I would not allow you to use, for example, infravision to read. And if a creature is, for example, the same temperature as the room that you're in, it has a much better chance of hiding than otherwise. That follows the AD&D version of Infravision, which I cut my teeth on, was Holmes, and then the first edition AD&D.
Nice. Our viewers in the poll channel, 53% said it's the seeing in the dark, kind of in like grayscales. 26% said seeing heat signatures. And then we had 13% that said can see gradient scale of color indescribable to humans, kind of like thermal and beams from old TV remotes. So we got kind of a
The
split there.
the one advantage of going with heat vision is that a torch damages the ability to see heat vision because there's a large amount of heat right next to you. So you do not have to describe an area both for the humans and then the elf.
Right.
Definite advantage.
Our next question was when the cleric with the using the cleric ability turn unholy, what creatures constitute unholy creatures?
That depends upon your alignment, and that's actually detailed in the book under the cleric.
There's a pretty obscure reference in there where it just says monsters for lawful and neutral, and then it gives a couple examples for each of those. Do
Like
you
basilisk or Medusa.
exactly? So is it
Yes.
more kind of abomination monsters, like if
I would say that they're saying things that are outside the ken of the natural world, so that a lot of things could be affected by the turn unholy of the cleric. But that's actually really a good thing because it goes by hit die first off. And more importantly, every time you get the cleric to roll the dice, there is a chance that you will get disapproval.
that's
And
true?
eventually you will get more disapproval and more disapproval and more disapproval. Uh, too many times players think of it as turning the undead. In DCC, it is specifically not. If you're a lawful cleric, you can turn chaotic humanoids, which would mean that you could potentially turn the elf in your party.
If the elf pisses you off. Well, we had
Yeah.
64% say that only the creatures that are listed in the DCC RPG deity description per alignment. But then we had a little kind of offshoot branch of 35% that says, as listed in the DCC RPG and situationally. Clerics have a vague idea, but they really don't know until they try.
That's sort of fair. I would also say if you have a god of evil avians, the odds are pretty good that you cannot turn those things because they are linked to your god. They're not unholy no matter what your alignment is. So holy or unholy is also situational to the person you worship.
There you go. And Stefan, what was our last question?
Well, our last question was actually, I was accidentally pulled up the questions for this week. Let me see. Struggling to find our last question, but I got it now. During player's action, can they split up their movement? You know, do a little bit of move, attack, and then finish up the rest of their movement.
If you look at the rules as written, you're allowed a movement and an action. But let's say that you have two action dice. You can take a move for an action. So you could presumably move, attack, and then use another action die if you're higher level. Or let's say you are a warrior or a dwarf and you would like to use your mighty deed to attempt to keep going after your attack. That is completely legitimate in my book. However, if you are just a regular person and you're hoping within 10 seconds to go from one cover, shoot an arrow and shoot the next, or sorry, and get behind cover again, so that within that time frame, nobody has a chance to shoot back at you, I would not normally do that, no.
Surprisingly, in the poll results, we had 55% say yes, they can move, take an action, and then finish moving, and only 44% said they can only move and take an action, or take an action and then move. So most of our viewers disagree. I think we all agreed on that one as well, Stefan.
Yeah, that is a surprise to me.
Right, well, there we have it. What's our first question for tonight, Stefan? You said you had them ready to go?
I did. So our first one tonight is we're kind of elf focused, but this is about casters in general. Are casters allowed to change out the spells they have prepared with other spells they know? I guess more just elves and wizards on this one.
What,
Uh,
what's
the
your, what's your
Go ahead.
initial thoughts on it, Dane?
The tough thing there is that a wizard or an elf, according to the book, as far as I can tell, has spells known, not spells prepared. So in my book, changing up spells that you know is a quest for that situation.
Elena, if you can bring up handout 1A for us. On page 314, it says, while divine entities may place knowledge in the hearts of clerics, wizard spells result from dangerous interactions that do not follow predictable rules. Magic is not like physics. So we get kind of a general description right there of kind of like what wizard and elf magic is. And
Oh,
then
staticky.
oh, we got that static again. And then in handout 1B, which is page 314 as well, this is a medieval feudal society without bookbinding technology. Knowledge is rare, and knowledge of spells and magic is even rarer. Talking about kind of the frequency where we would find these spells, stuff like that. If we look at page 26, and as always, everyone, we're using the DCC RPG 8th printing. That's the one most commonly used by everyone. Handout 1C on page 26 says level advancement. Under that category, as a character completes adventures, they practice their skills and become more talented. So there's really not a clear directive on whether you can change spells out or not in the book. What do you think, Stefan?
We got a little bit of that static again. I've allowed it in my games from, they find some scrolls, steal a spell book, that kind of thing. I've allowed it in my games just to have something to do with that scroll that you find, that wizard spell book, because especially when it's a wizard spell book, they want to use it. They want to use it soon. I've told them, you can use it like a scroll. You're going to use it, but you have to use it up in the components. I've told them you can use it now, but at a lower action die than you normally would, like 2 action die down. So they're using a D14, and they pretty much got a spell burn. And I've told them, no, you can't learn it now. You got to wait until you level up and you have time to like really study this one. So I've done a variety of answers on this to try to find out what seems to work best. None of them seem to break the game, but I'm not sure which is the quote unquote right answer.
I think it's more as kind of the pleasure of the caster. They would like to probably be able to change them out if they know them. And I think it stems mostly from D&D, the various editions. Now, I've never played 3, 3.5, or 4, but if we bring up handout 1D, Elena, in 5th edition, when you level up in class, you can choose one of your class spells, and replace it with another spell from your spell list. So there is a precedence that people know for changing their spells. And Daniel, you came up in old school D&D. Um, has that been? Have you
That I
played
did.
all the versions? Has that been consistent through all of it?
I have not played very much for. I played Holmes Basic, first edition, second edition, third edition, 3.5, very little 4, and a bit of 5. Uh, no, in early D&D, you just kind of pick your spells per day. In 5, it's a bit different, but again, within DCC, I don't really care what they do in D&D anymore.
Yeah,
Uh, I would say if you want to change the spell, find a way to do it within the game.
I had to dig deep on this one, you guys, but I did find in the forum, if we can bring out handout 1E, some possible guidance by JG on this. So the limit of spells known is because that's how Jack Vance did it. I assume you've read his Dying Earth series. It's the origin point for what's commonly known as Vancian magic. Many gamers use the term Vancian magic freely without actually having read Vance. His Dying Earth series, along with Harold Shea series by DeCamp and Pratt, were the two primary inspirations for OD&D Magic System. And so it says, I've experienced some miscommunication in the past when it comes to terms like known versus cast and so on. A spellcaster may have quite a few spells in his spellbook and scrolls of even more spells, but what he can cast is limited by his level. You can call that spells known or spells castable, or whatever other term you'd like. The underlying concept is that the level limits of one's ability to execute magic. And Daniel, I've seen your post on the forums as well. You've been with DCC right from the beginning, right?
Yeah, I was running it from the early playtest on.
So go ahead.
I know DCC Dying Earth is coming out, and there might be some differences in DCC Dying Earth. However, again, in the rules as they are, it's important to remember that anyone can cast a spell. Your warrior can make a spell check if he's daring enough. He's using a D10, but you could spend luck. You could do other things to try to make that better. Opponents, possibly. There are some other options that occur in the book. Your wizard or elf might have access to spells that they don't know, but within a scroll or a spell book or something like that, they could attempt to cast them without actually knowing them. That's perfectly fine.
Yeah. And
And
speaking of DCC Dying Earth, Elaine, if you bring out handout 1F, I've got the magician class memorization part of it. And I think that goes back towards what Dungeons and Dragons kind of does, where a magician can prepare spells that are held in his mind ready to cast, spending a full turn in study for each level of each target spell, after which they must retire for a period of rest and meditation. So once you cast it, it's gone from your mind, and you have to have that spell book of your spells to prepare again.
that is very much what happens in the fan stories. They're the original Fire and Forget.
I've got. Go ahead.
Whereas the Harold Shea stories are a lot more, I'm going to make this up and see if it works.
We've got one more handout from the forums before we definitively answer this question, and it's from handout 1G, where Joseph says the known spells for wizards is the maximum number of different spells that wizards can cast. Now, remember, folks, this is back from 2011 beta days. Once a spell is known in this sense, it becomes a permanent choice, and the wizard can't backtrack on it. A level 1 wizard may know 4 different spells. Note that those 4 initial spells are determined randomly, and then it goes on to talk about a, a bunch more stuff as far as spells and spell books where you can find. Stefan, did you get a chance to read those forum entries? What do you think about all
I
that?
I did, and so yeah, it seems like Joseph's answer to it, and he created the game after all. So maybe the answer to it is you just get those spells, and if you want to use other ones, maybe you can use it as a scroll, and it gets destroyed during its usage, or you got to wait until you level
Does a
up.
scroll get destroyed during its use?
I don't know what I don't. Well, that's
The question for
maybe
another
maybe that's my early D and D
you tell
training, but I
us
started on third edition, so
Uh, the ones that I have written for Goodman Games, which include, I believe there are some scrolls in Curse of the Kingspire that I converted, and possibly in Dragora's Dungeon. I was variable about what happens when you use a scroll. Some of them get used up right away. Some of them have multiple uses. Some of them just keep going till you really mess it up.
and I think that's a preconceived notion we have from D&D that they get burned up
yeah.
upon use. I've never, and I've given a couple scrolls out in the games we've played, but nobody ever uses them. They give them to the wizard, and the wizard tries to put them in their spell book for later.
It's
I've
getting added to
also
the list.
I have also in play had the players change spells by basically using the quest for it mechanic. And in one case, I had a player use the quest for it mechanic to learn a version of his spell that had a different material
Nice. Yeah, that's a good one because
because it killed everyone, or it killed somebody every time he cast it. So it wasn't going to get cast very often.
all right, well,
Nope.
let's see what our official answers are. Are casters allowed to change out the spells they have prepared with other spells they know? Um, I'm gonna say yes, and it may or may not be rules as written. We really don't have a definitive answer as far as the rule book goes, but kind of going into those Dying Earth books where they would read and prepare spells, and that was what they had, and they could go back and read and prepare a different spell. I'm gonna give it a yes, Stefan. What do you think?
I'm gonna say no. I've allowed it almost all the time, and when I've been running games since I've been doing DCC. But after seeing those forum posts from Joseph, I'm gonna say no.
All right, and Daniel, you get the last definitive answer on this question.
In that
Rules is
case, the
written.
definitive answer is no.
All right, there you have it.
However,
Okay.
page 312 is the important rule as written. If you're running the game and you think, hey, this is going to be more fun or more the way I want it to be, then go for it.
All right, there you have it, folks. Stefan, what's our next question for tonight?
So our next question is more specifically about elves. If I can get back over, it is: do bonus spells that are given by a patron count against the maximum number of known spells that an elf is able to cast? I guess this would, elves, they always get the patron bond and the invoke patron. So a little more focus on them, but really just as applicable to wizards,
And I've
as long
seen
as they
this
have a
one.
patron.
Yeah, I've seen this one come up quite a bit because they do the patron bond spell and they get pretty high and they get a patron spell and they're like, well, does that count as one of my known spells or do I get 5 total instead of 4? Daniel, what's your opinion on this one?
My opinion is it does not count if you get it from the patron bond spell. Specifically, if you are getting it from patron bond, it is a limited number of times per day. You owe the patron a favor. It is as though you are, and basically it replaces one invocation of the patron, and invoke patron is the same spell. So
Okay.
I would say no, it's a specific invocation of the patron.
I,
But I would also say that you could potentially randomly gain a patron spell on the chart in the book, in which case it is a normal spell and all the normal things apply.
think your answer is 100% correct. Elena, if we bring up handout 2A on page 127, that's where our spell list is. And, for the first level result, number 27, we got a patron spell. Number 24 for second level, we got a patron spell. There are 3 little asterisks after those. And it says down at the bottom, ignore this result if the wizard does not have the spell patron bond. If the wizard has the spell, he also gains the appropriate patron spell. So I think that's in reference to exactly what Daniel said on that you are able to learn it later. If we look at handout 2B on page 320 and 321, it talks about patron spells. Invoking the aid of a patron is a highly unpredictable process. The winds of a demon are such that the aid sought is not always the aid that is given. When invoke patron is cast, the results can vary wildly, but in some cases, a patron can also grant access to specific spells. According to its whims and natures, the spell tables include an entry for a patron spell at each level. The examples below describe level 1, 2, 3 patron spells for several patrons in detail. The judge should feel free to develop more spells. And then on page 321, it says, now note that patron spells are generally speaking slightly more powerful. Um, but just as the invoke patron, every casting of a patron spell represents an act performed on the wizard's behalf by the patron who demand recompense at some future date. So you got 2 instances here. You got one where you can learn it when you already have the patron bond and level up down the road and you're rolling randomly. And then you have the instance where you roll your patron bond and you can get those spells to replace invoke patron. Is that how you see it, Stefan?
That's exactly how I see it.
uh,
The
dive in.
neat thing about patrons as they're written with the thing that you owe them is every time you owe your patron, that is a hook that the judge has available. And that is also why when we go back to the previous question, you should make them quest for a change in their spells because that is a hook that you can actually put a requirement on that.
Connect those two together. Nice.
Mm-hmm.
If
I mean,
we
you
bring
could.
up, go ahead, Steph.
I was going to say you could theoretically have find a scroll of one of those patron spells that now various non-patron associated people are learning. The patron probably hates it, and you can probably link it all the way back to one person who used to serve that patron and learn that spell, figured out how to write it down, and then switch from the King of Elfland to Ozzy to Haka or something like that. So there's a lot of good quests you can go from there.
And there should be some real consequences to doing that.
Oh yeah.
Like, not only for the guy who wrote those scrolls to begin with, but here you are, your cleric is reading them, and she's invoking Bugbills, whether she knows it or not. And he is paying attention.
And so is the god that cleric is actually worshiping too. No one's
Yes.
happy with this situation.
No, no,
And there's
no.
going to be multiple gods probably saying, go kill this person and this person and this person and destroy this book.
Well,
I believe you are now going full Michael Moorcock in your game.
if we bring up handout 2C, please, Lena, we've got some wizard spell patron bond results here. And so for 24 through 27, kind of on down to 32, in the middle it says the gift is a single patron spell selected from the patron spell list. The caster may cast this spell once per day in place of a casting of invoke patron. So it definitely gives clear indication on what's going on there. If we look at handout 2D, which I went and got some excerpts from the annual, the DCC annual, and I forgot to give you a link for that later, but it's on the Goodman Games website store. If you guys haven't got it, I suggest picking it up. So for the patron carnifex, the chosen may learn 3 spells, and that's what most of them say. But there's a couple in here like Hecken Hoda. Am I saying that right, Daniel?
As far as I know, yes.
Who teaches his followers 3 spells out of the Grimoire of Endless Night. Um, so that's how they get their spells. Maybe if you have a certain patron, you get certain more benefits. Is that a
Uh,
possibility?
you know that I believe that it is because I have written about using patrons in DCC a lot. And one of the things that you should really think about, whether you're using a pre-written patron or one of your own creation, is this an NPC patron or a PC patron? How much fun will I have if the players say, hey, I want that guy as my patron? And if it's going to be fun, like lure them into it. You can offer all kinds of extra things. It could be your quest for it to change your spell. Well, that patron can help you get that patron. It could be whatever you want. Some gift that the patron can offer. Uh, could be the knowledge of a spell in your spell knowledge searching. I'm trying to learn this spell. Well, that patron knows that spell. Could change your mercurial. Well, if you were worshipping the king of Elfland, you would get that particular background, or not background, but you know what I mean, mercurial effect. Uh,
While I
you
was
could
digging around, go ahead, Daniel. I'm sorry.
you could even, if you're really really creative and had the time to do it, make up mercurial charts that affect you as soon as you have a patron, so that if you have that patron, you're now rolling. You could make it easier and call it a D30 with a luck modifier without going +5 per one, and now you're using the King of Elfland mercurial magic.
Nice.
And
I did
I'll say for
find.
Mercurial Magic and Elven Mercurial Magic, I remember in Angels, Demons, and Beings in Between two
Demons.
Elfland edition. That's right. They fill in that the 41 to 60 Mercurial table with elf themed Mercurial magics, And there's a lot of elf patrons in there too, and they are certainly. I mean, it's a third-party module, or well, not module, but product. But not all those patrons in there are of equivalent power, and I think that really goes the same for the core rulebook too.
Yeah, I
That
agree.
middle ground is also filled in by Brendan LaSalle in the 50 Fantastic Functions for the D50. And it is filled in by Doug Kovacs in one of his Hobonomicons, but I can't remember which one off the top of my head, but
I
all
think number
worthwhile.
2.
I think it's Hobonomicon number 2. I did find while I was digging around one very interesting little thing for a third level cleric spell. Elena, if you could bring out handout 2E on page 288, the spell Exercise. And when cast, the cleric makes a spell check as normal. If their spell check exceeds the spell check made when the original patron bond was cast, the bond is broken and the subject of the bond loses all benefits of that bond immediately. This can also include losing patron spells that they have learned. So I didn't even realize there was a spell out there. I don't think I've had anybody ever use Exercise to do this, to try to break a patron bond that a wizard or elf or monster might
Mm-hmm.
have.
Harsh, but fair.
Then they'd have to recast it. The patron be pissed off. How come you didn't kill that guy before you separated my connection to you? I do have one more handout on handout 2F. The Noble Drake asks, might we also get reasoning why the patron spells, given as gifts by high patron bond results and tied with the same daily limit as Invoke Patron, are meant to count as their own spells? And JG says the limit to daily castings of Invoke Patron reflects the limits of the patron's willingness to help his devotees. The patron is there to help in emergencies, not to be a solution to every problem. Thus, the patron will typically answer a couple callings each day, but no more. If the wizard gains the ability to substitute a patron spell for castings of Invoke Patron, as determined by the results for Patron Bond, that's part of the same concept. The patron will provide aid here and there, but isn't available to focus all its attention on solving problems. This is also a strong incentive to use Spellburn when casting first Patron Bond, but then I highlighted the bottom there where it definitively answers the question. Note that a wizard could learn a patron spell as a normal spell slot later on. And so I'm almost positive he's talking about after the bond has already been established and they level up, like Daniel said at the beginning.
It's nice to be confirmed. Thank you. Also, related to this, there's nothing preventing somebody from having more than one patron,
Oh yeah.
apart from the possibility that the patrons might not be happy about it, might want to do something about it. As a judge, if you can get your players to have more than one patron for their characters, I say go for it and have fun with it.
There you go. All right, so our exact answers, Stefan, do bonus spells that are given by the patron count against the maximum number of known spells that an elf is able to cast? What is your answer?
No, they just take up or they get cast in place of one of your allowed invoke patron spells, whatever your frequency of being able to cast that is.
I absolutely 100% agree. No, they do not take up one of the known spell slots. They get replaced when you get used in place of an invoke patron, but you can learn one later on if you have that bond established. And
Yep,
Daniel,
exactly.
you get the final answer.
Your final answer is just absolutely correct. If, from my point of view anyway, if you're getting it through Invoke Patron, it does not take up a slot. If you get it Allspice, it does.
There you go. I think this next question is going to be pretty quick. Usually I got like 5 or 6, 7 handouts. You guys know that. This one I really only had 2. I think it's pretty definitive, but it gets asked a lot. Are elves able to use their enhanced senses at 0 level to check for secret doors? And that is question number 3, Elena. So what do you think, Daniel? 0 level elf, do you let them check for secret doors and use
Uh,
their enhanced senses?
Everyone can check for secret doors. The enhances of an elf mean they get a free check if they pass within 10 feet of that secret door, and that is listed in the book as being something they have at 0 level. So yes, they absolutely can.
What do you think, Stefan?
Yeah, 100%. It gets forgotten a lot in funnels because we barely remember who among the 24 characters, that our players have are elves or dwarves or humans or what, but they absolutely get it.
Yeah, I always like to try to get an elf just so I get a secret door check. I get a secret door check. See if I can find one. But yeah, if we bring up handout 3A, page 21 tells us that demi-humans at level 0 level demi-humans are able to utilize select racial traits
Static.
as follows. Dwarves have infravision and a base speed of 20. Elves are sensitive to iron and have heightened senses. And halflings have infravision and the base speed of 20. So right there, it tells us that the demi-humans do get their abilities. So if we look at the heightened senses and what that definition is, because we've already defined that they get it at 0 level, handout 3B says on page 57, elves are astute and observant. An elf character receives a +4 bonus to detecting secret doors. Moreover, when simply passing within 10 feet of a secret door, elves are entitled to a check to detect it. I think it's pretty definitive.
If you think about it as a judge, you want them to find the secret door anyway.
Yeah, you do. And so many times we've kind of relied on the dice, and the dice say you don't find a secret door, but the adventure would be so much cool if you had found it.
Yeah, well, I still accept that role though, because otherwise, what's the point of having it? And if you look at something like Siglars of the Starless Sea, there is a secret door which is slightly ajar. You automatically find it if you look, which means that an elf passing by automatically finds it.
So let me ask you this, Daniel. When a person is checking for a secret door, what ability stat do you have them roll?
Usually intelligence.
And the elves are pretty
Great.
smart usually from being casters, so that'd be a
The
pretty good
elves
roll.
roll 3d6 like everybody else.
That's true.
And honestly, it is more fun to have a dumb elf than a smart elf sometimes because you get those failed spell checks. And in DCC, failure can be hilarious.
Well, I think our answers for this one are pretty quick. Burn through that question. Are elves able to use their enhanced senses at 0 level to check for secret doors? My definitive answer on that, rules is written. Yes, they can. At 0 level, they can use it. Stefan?
Absolutely. 0 levels, A-okay.
And Daniel, what's your final
Yes,
answer
they
on that?
absolutely can.
All right, there you have it, folks. Stefan, what's our last question for the night?
Our last official question is the how debilitating is an elf's vulnerability to iron, and how often does it come into play, and should it be expanded?
What do you think, Daniel?
Okay, the debilitation in the book is if you are wearing metal armor and using iron or steel because it contains iron, armor or weapons, then you are going to suffer 1 hit point damage per day, which is similar to effectively not being able to heal. Debilitating, sure. If you have the ring of Sezrekan that's made of iron and you're wearing it as an elf, does that count? I would say yes. Should it be more debilitating? If you have read some of the things I've written, I would say, oh, yes. Uh, if you look at the Arwich Grinder, I go out of the way to point out that if you're going down the iron runs for an elf, it is debilitating for some time because it's painful. And Silent Nightfall in particular, I actually lined the dungeon with metal plates that are debilitating to elves. So the farther down they go, the more debilitated they are. If you're going to have those abilities or disabilities, yes, definitely you can play with them. Follow the appendice literature, in particularly Powell Anderson, Broken Sword, on that, and just knock yourself out.
I completely agree. I think the elf kind of gets off with that vulnerability. If we have bring up handout 1A, please, Elena, if you would. Page 57. Elves are extremely sensitive to the touch of iron. Direct contact over prolonged periods can cause a burning sensation, and exposure at close distances can make them uncomfortable. An elf may not wear iron armor or bear the touch of iron weapons for extended periods, Prolonged contact causes 1 HP of damage per day of direct contact. So that's not really a vulnerability. I mean, it is, but it's never ever happened in my game where elf has lost 1 hit point from being holding iron too long. Stefan, have you ever seen it happen?
Uh, I have, but it's just been a well, I don't my I was holding iron today, so I lost a point, and then I rested tonight, so I healed a point. So that just kind of cancels out. Whatever. That's kind of been the attitude I've seen.
I think, like Daniel said, in things he's written, it definitely needs to be more dynamic, an
Mm-hmm.
actual effect that you can put into game. If we bring up handout 4B, I pulled some vulnerabilities to that are in the DCCR for other things, like page 4412. Now, these are monsters, so of course their rules are different than they are for characters. But fire elementals are vulnerable to cold and water. They can't bear the touch of it and won't pursue prey under the water, through streams, across lakes or waterfalls, and they take double damage. Water elementals vulnerable to fire and heat. They can't bear the heat and fire and take double damage. Vulnerable to fire. Mummies are vulnerable to fire. Uh, Double damage from fire from the year's subterranean exposure. And trolls are vulnerable to fire. The trolls' only vulnerability is to fire, and they cannot regenerate damage from fire. So those are debilitating. Double damage, like 1 hit point a day. That's kind of meh.
Yeah, but you don't want to make the character unplayable. Like you can't go too far down the debilitation where every adventure the character has to sit in the corner and avoid all the other people with armor on. Like that will become just as bad.
Yeah.
So I think as a judge, what you want to do is include that and remind the player from time to time, that amount of iron is going to cause you a problem. You find it uncomfortable. If the player does not follow through with it, then start debilitating the player. Same thing for things like hunger and thirst and other effects like in D&D 3.0 and on. You have to have a huge list of effects for this condition or that condition or the other condition. In DCC, you can say, well, you're really, really hungry. You haven't eaten for a couple of days. And the player doesn't want to take that into account. Give him a -1D penalty to his rolls. He will soon learn to take that into account. Or I should say, they will soon learn to take that into account.
Yeah.
Uh,
They will. I make my players eat and drink all the time. Sirius can verify that.
what about their characters?
They're characters too.
They're just checking.
Yeah, they're usually eating when they come on stream anyway. I did find a little thing that got my wheels working. If Elena, if you could bring up handout 4C, please. On page 446, Appendix P, the poisons. Imagine a poison from the plane of air that turned a character permanently incorporeal, or one from the pits of hell that made a character especially vulnerable to weapons of steel. Now, that got me thinking, what if there was a poison that made you especially vulnerable to weapons of mithril? Then, that mithril armor and mithril weapons the elf is carrying, then holding it all day might bring about that 1 point of damage.
You could also say, what if there was a poison that, because of its iron content, affected elves much, much worse?
What do you
Well,
think, Stefan?
it says in the actual description of the vulnerability, prolonged contact with iron. So that is like skin to iron contact that it's describing. I It's not in the rules, but I think adding something like that is having blood to iron, having iron cut you open, and tiny little fragments of iron get stuck in the underneath of your skin and in your bloodstream. That sounds like a whole different thing than prolonged contact with your skin. So, to put that in mechanical terms, I think it would be totally fair to house rule it and say if you're an elf and you get struck with an iron weapon, +1 damage on whatever is going to happen because you get a really high dosage version of your typical vulnerability of just holding a sword that's made of iron today.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And that is much better than saying double damage, because
Yeah,
that's a bit too much. Just say though, plus 1d damage
that
and
might be
raise the
even
damage
better.
up the dice chain.
That's even better. That's using the system.
Those are some great suggestions. I like to do the elf vulnerability like um, not necessarily a whole day's worth of contact, but like repeated contact. We bring up handout 4E in Beneath the Well of Brass by Harley Stroh on page 3, area 1 2. Spoiler alert, everyone. There's a well of brass, and you have to go down it to continue. And there's a iron ladder, says a simple iron ladder descends the side of the well down into the darkness. Now, if I'm not mistaken, spoilers again, everyone, mute yourself if you don't want to know. That ladder's like 60 feet long. So if you got an elf in your party and you're missing a halfling glove maker, the halfling glove maker is not there. Um, I like to give that elf, maybe 1 point of damage from climbing down that iron ladder. 60 feet of iron.
I gave them a negative 1d penalty for 30 minutes, I believe, from climbing down the ladders in the Arwich Grinder.
Yeah, that's
And
perfect.
that
I
was not 60, that was not 60 feet.
I love those cases. I think it definitely should be expanded and made a little more of a debilitating vulnerability, but not enough so that the players don't enjoy playing elf, because the elf is pretty powerful. The elf is a powerful class.
I think you could also have a situation where, like, if you're the elves probably can't hang out in the mines very much. They can't hang out with the local blacksmith if there's one in their village because they're smelting iron all the time. It's getting in the air. It's gonna, that elf is gonna get their own special version of miner's lung or asthma or something just from being in that environment.
Spoiler alert. In Creeping Beauties of the Wood, I put it in Axe that is cursed. It's based off of the acts from The Wizard of Oz, the book, not the movie, that the Tin Woodsman has, and it cuts off his limbs one by one until he has to get them replaced by tin, becomes Tin Woodsman. This one replaces your limbs with iron, and I did note what that will do to an elf. Yeah,
Why?
when I ran that, the wizard got the axe and ended up with an entirely iron body. The elf could not stand to be near him.
That is outstanding. I love that it's incorporated into the module and into the writing because, you know, the judge is already doing work prepping for the adventure. If they're using a VTT, they're getting, the VTT ready. If they're in person, they're getting handouts ready. They got to read the entire module. So when it's already incorporated into the adventure, I really appreciate that because then I don't have to worry about planning all this stuff out.
I do think that when you're writing, at least you should have an idea what are the most likely things to have happened, and then have some guidance for those things.
Absolutely. And
I
you kind of have to have a. I know I've put in a weird Frontiers adventure I wrote a thing of like, well, this hasn't happened in one of my playtests, but if I ran with this one buddy of mine, I know he'd try this, and he's probably not the only one.
Yeah,
well,
that's similar to, again, spoiler, Arwich Grinder. There is a bit where you might not have done a particular thing in the past that is part of the background of the adventure. And when I first ran it for my middle child and their friend, their friend was going to say originally, "I never did that," and immediately my middle child was like, "Do not say that because there will be something bad that happens if you did." And absolutely correct.
for this one, let's give our final answers for this one. How debilitating is the elf's vulnerability to iron, and how often does it come into play? And should it be expanded? Stefan, what is your final answer for that question?
Final answer: it's not very debilitating. It's just one hit point of damage a day for prolonged contact with your skin, but it should be expanded if they are in an environmental situation, taking damage from iron weapons in a iron mine, something like that.
Completely agree. Rules is written. How debilitating is the elf's invulnerability to iron? Like Stefan said, only one hit
It's
point
one
from
hit point
prolonged
per
contact.
day, but the descriptive bit that it's uncomfortable. If the players do not actually realize that that has real effects in the game, then it has to have real effects in the game, or it means nothing. So I have given examples of how I've used it. Uh, I would recommend other people consider those things as not just iron vulnerability, but all those special abilities are an opportunity for you to play with the character. Not
I guess
always in a nice way.
I don't think that could be better well said. I did find a handout that I mislabeled, I think. Elena, if you could bring up handout 4D, I guess I had three handouts for the zero level abilities. This is from JG on June 8th, 2011, and he says zero level demo humans should get their basic racial powers, infravision, etc. at zero level. There we had another confirmation for our third question. And
Good.
I did want to go back to our second one real quick, or our first one. Are casters allowed to change spells they have prepared with other spells they know? And I said no. You guys said yes. What I forgot to say
I
is
I said no unless they quest for it.
right.
Yeah, I
I
I said
said
no also.
yeah. I said yes, and I forgot the little caveat for that. I think when they level up, that should be able to take place, not on just a regular day of studying spells. They have that one locked in their head, but upon level advancement, since it says on page 26 that they're practicing the skill and they become more talented, that's when I would give that opportunity to say, hey, I know of five other spells. I want to switch, sleep out with flaming hands. And because they're getting more adept and more trained in that ability, during level up, I would let them switch. I had to throw that little caveat in there to my answer.
I would like
Mm.
nothing more than to see a player play a wizard and leave spell slots open so that he can fill them with higher level spells later on in the game. There is absolutely no reason why you have to take any spells at any level. You'd leave them all till you can get fifth level spells. If you can find a way to survive using magic items, using things that you've quested for up until that time, that would be just completely awesome and would be a great character.
I've
Yeah, I
I've only
agree.
seen that once, and it was because the player forgot he got a bonus spell from having high enough intelligence. So he got to have a level 2 spell, and he's, oh great, I can have two of them actually. I said sure.
Yeah, we want that
Here
immediate
they go.
gratification, those immediate choices to pull from. But that is our time for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you guys for joining us. Daniel, do you have anything coming up? Anything you want to discuss?
There is some writing that I'm doing that I probably should not yet discuss, uh, related to the potentially upcoming Kickstarter for Goodman Games for their monster book. Uh, I have a Patreon that I've started that is for the not the world's most popular role playing game, but I would say the world's best role playing game. That also, because I haven't gone to official channels, I shouldn't mention by name. Uh, Other than that, nothing I can actually talk about at this moment.
Can you give us a hint on what your favorite monster is so far in that thing that might be coming up?
Uh, there are a lot of interesting monsters, but it was fun to use the DCC rules to take dragons that were in fifth edition stats and then DCCify them so that they could be made or close to being made with the dragon generator. And then you're looking at the extras and bits to personalize that dragon generator. So there are some things that are in that book, great examples of how to use what is in the core book. And I really enjoy doing that.
Nice.
Stefan, what's your coming up schedule looking like? You got anything going on?
I'm gonna be running and playing some games at the Lone Star Game Expo. It's in Grapevine, Texas. So it's fairly local to me. Besides that, I was at the used bookstore this weekend, and I picked up a few Appendix N books. So I'm gonna be trying to get some reading in.
That was the
I
Andre Norton book there.
Yeah, I
I
got Witch
recognize that one.
World by Andre Norton. I
Good
got
book.
Blue Star by Fletcher Pratt, and I got The Foxwoman and Other Stories by Abram Merritt.
Sorry. Oh, there's some good stuff in that one. You'll
Yeah.
see some of the antecedents or the things that helped inform my reading of Through the Dragon Wall are from Amar are in that book.
I tell you,
Mm-hmm.
Witch World is the only one I
Inspirations is
can't
the word I was
find.
looking for.
You haven't found well.
I've
I'll say
found
I
a
tried to
ton of
read the Blue
other.
Star once
Yeah,
and I
that
it was a little tough, but I'm gonna give it
I
another
have
shot.
read it. Uh, it does include, I would say, a cleric that has healing powers,
Hmm.
if you want to
Okay.
call it a cleric, a person in a religious order with healing powers. But it is not the thrilling, fast-paced sword and sorcery book that maybe one usually thinks of with the Apprentice.
Yeah. Well,
We
that's why
also
I quit it the first time. How about you though, Matt? You got
we
anything?
also well, we've got the DCC Road Crew Day coming up
Yeah.
on September 24th, right? And I think the registration for that will be on September 19th. So if you're a road crew judge out there, be looking for that. It's a reward from Goodman Games to all the people that run games for them using DCC RPG. It's an outstanding way to give back to the community, and I think Goodman Games really excels in that area.
Absolutely does.
Also, if you haven't joined the road crew yet, Brendan said it himself on Mike and Maw the other night. You can get a game in right now and be able to play in those road crew games with some very famous Goodman Game judges, and we hope we see you there, Daniel. Hopefully, I'm trying to get
Uh,
into a Daniel Bishop team.
we shall see. I just found out about it today, so I haven't gotten any definitive plans, but maybe.
All right. Well, thank you guys for coming, and Daniel, thank you for being our guest this evening. We'll
Uh,
see you in 2 weeks, where we're trying to lock in Jen Brinkman for being our guest. Um,
oh, so I probably shouldn't mention it, but I believe Jen Brinkman is working on the next DCC campaign setting, DCC Blue Star.
Oh
ooh,
boy.
that is a
I'm
little.
not
Now I
serious.
gotta read it.
When they did Blue Star on Sanctum
But
Sanctorum, they were not really impressed.
I didn't listen to that, but I listened to the Appendix in book club, and they weren't either.
Yes, it's an unusual entry for the Appendician.
All right.
Alas.
Well, that's it for us tonight. Have a good night, everyone, and thanks for joining us. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
All right, thank you for being such excellent hosts.